I started to do this video last night when I saw it, but I thought maybe I should just, kind of sleep on it and take another look at it, make a video this morning. I did, and I am. It troubles me greatly that when it comes to black people, their history, things they've done, right or wrong, and a lot of times when it's on Fox News, they'll dive into a history and pull out everything under the sun that they've done wrong. And when they can't find anything that an individual victim of police brutality's done wrong, then they'll dive into their immediate family and try to expose any wrongdoing that their immediate family has done wrong. This particular story obviously has to do with the Freddie Gray case and the fact that Officer Nero was found not guilty by the judge. Okay, whichever way you want to come down on this particular verdict, that's up to you. I reviewed the information that was available to me, and I could not really find fault with the judge in this particular case. However, I am finding fault with Mr. O'Reilly of Fox News in his depiction of Mr. Gray. Why is it that no matter what Mr. Gray's past was, that has to be brought into this particular case? Basically, he was killed by the police. Now, you can argue which officer was responsible, no officer was really responsible, but he died as a result of being taken into police custody and was fully within police custody when he suffered the traumatic injuries that he did, and shortly thereafter died. So someone is responsible, and it's our job to try to determine how many and who, or who and how many. But again, Bill O'Reilly has a black radio host on, and the radio host basically is somewhat siding with Mr. O'Reilly as far as the overall interaction between the police and the community. So I'm going to play the clip, and then I'll make my comments at the points that I feel are indicated.
Packed segment tonight, as you may know. 6 Baltimore police officers charged in the death of 25-year-old Freddie Gray on April 19th, 2015. Now, one trial's over, and police officer Edward Nero, 30 years old, has been acquitted of all charges. Joining us from Baltimore, Clarence Mitchell, radio talk show host on WBAL. So, Mr. Mitchell, what was the reaction from your listeners today after the acquittal?
It was pretty much expected, Bill. This case of the 6 officers, Officer Edward Nero's case, was the weakest. He was charged with second-degree assault, 2 counts of police misconduct, and reckless endangerment, all resulting in the arrest of Freddie Gray. Had nothing to do with him in the van. So of all the officers, him and the other officer who made the arrest, Officer Miller, they have the weakest of all the charges.
What about the reaction in the community? Everybody feared that if there were acquittals in the case, now we've had one hung jury for the first officer, now Officer Nero's acquitted. Any sign of any unrest in Baltimore?
Not at all. And the national narrative that's out there, I want to challenge with using your show, Bill, I appreciate this, that somehow Baltimore is out of control because of what's happened. Yes, there were riots last year, but so far in both trials, there's not been anything related to violence. There's been nothing associated with people getting out of control. The way the Judge Barry Williams, who decided this case was a bench trial, it was not a jury trial, was appropriate. Justice was rendered in this case, as well as the mistrial. So I don't want this national narrative out there, Bill, that somehow Baltimoreans are out of control and can't handle judgments in court.
All right, no. I mean, listen, the proof will be what happens. Now we have 5 more trials, a trial that was in a hung jury, and 4 other officers coming up. In that case, in those cases, do you expect more intensity on the part of the public?
I expect more, I'll put it this way, there's more attention to those cases because those are the more serious ones. We have one case with Officer Cesar Goodson, the next case, which has, he was the driver of the van, 2nd-degree depraved heart murder, manslaughter, more serious charges. So with the other cases that involve the actual van part that has resulted in Freddie Gray having an 80% severance of his spine, I expect more, if you want to call it emotion or attention to those cases. But with the case of the bike officers, that was Officer Nero and Officer Miller, I don't expect the same type of attention.
Okay. Has the issue of Mr. Gray ever been raised in the sense that he was a drug-involved person? The reports are he was a drug addict, and
see, what does that have to do with Mr. Gray being killed? I mean, here we are again. You want to bring up the history. Now, if you want to start bringing up history, let's bring up the history of the officer that chased Gray. Gray had indicated that he recognized the officers previously, okay, and that they had framed him for drug possession. So, and he, if you do your research, he had a court date for specifically that reason. So if Mr. Gray recognized this officer as someone who framed him and he decides to run so that he doesn't get framed again, he's well within his rights. And it is not illegal to run from police. But Mr. O'Reilly is obviously going to admit that particular statement of fact. And that is a statement of fact. Do your own research. You can find it if you dig. But anyway, here comes Mr. O'Reilly talking about the history of the person. And again, let's just grant that he is 100% right about the history. Does that mitigate the fact that Mr. Gray was not treated properly? It's between you and your conscience whether he should have even been arrested. But be that as it may, he was taken into custody. His history has nothing to do with his treatment while being under arrest and in control of the police. So for Mr. O'Reilly to bring that up, to me, basically is a pure deflection.
A street-level dealer, and that his interactions with police escalated over the years because of his narcotics involvement. Has anybody ever spotlighted that? Has that been a topic of discussion? Because as we know, Baltimore is a fairly serious drug problem.
I have. I mean, we're the heroin capital of the world, if you believe the Discovery Channel and other folks. I mean, for 40 years, Baltimore has had a serious heroin problem. But, Bill, what you need to understand, the audience needs to understand, for over a decade, this city has experienced some really harsh policing under then-Mayor Martin O'Malley, then Governor O'Malley, now we know presidential candidate O'Malley, where 100,000 folks were locked up in a city of 600,000, Bill, and 30,000 of those each year, and 30,000 of those arrests thrown out for lack of probable cause. So the relationship...
Wait a minute. Let's run that back again.
This needs to understand, for over a decade, this city has experienced some really harsh policing under then-Mayor Martin O'Malley, then Governor O'Malley, now we know presidential candidate O'Malley, where 100,000 folks were locked up in a city of 600,000, Bill, and 30,000 of those each year, and 30,000 of those arrests thrown out for lack of probable cause. So the relationship between the police and the community bubbled up with Freddie. Freddie Gray is a bad example, but there's been a long-term problem associated with the police and the community in Baltimore.
All right. So, I mean, that tells you a lot of what you need to know. 100,000 arrests, 30,000 of them thrown out for lack of probable cause. 30%. But yet and still, that 30% is now in the system, okay? They're in the system. And you, once you're fingerprinted and booked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you might be able to get your fingerprints and records expunged from your local or city government or judicial system. You might be able to get your records and fingerprints expunged from the state system. But once your fingerprints go to the FBI, good luck, brother. Those fingerprints will be there for life. So you are in the system. And 30%, and I'm willing to make a small wager, I'm not 100%, but I'm 95% sure that the majority of that 30% are going to be young black males.
Is it drug related because there's so many narcotics in the town and the police obviously have to deal with these people every day?
Yes, but they need to have probable cause to make an arrest. When you have 30,000 arrests out of 100,000 being thrown out for lack of probable cause, that's a problem, Bill, for any metropolitan
But
area.
it might be that the system's overwhelmed, which sounds like it is in Baltimore. But anyway.
That's a bullshit answer. The system is overwhelmed. It's the cops, the guys that are on the line, they're making bad arrests. That's not the system being overwhelmed. That's them not concentrating where they actually should, where they can make a good arrest, and just creating arrests to pad their numbers. So Bill O'Reilly's statement that the system is being overwhelmed is a bunch of crap.
No, it's not the system. It's a bad arrest.
I think all Americans, no matter when a citizen dies like Freddie Gray did, it's never the citizen's fault in the sense that Freddie Gray didn't get up in the morning and say, I'm going to do something and I'm going to die. But Freddie Gray's lifestyle for many years led him to this terrible thing, which has not only impacted him and his family, but all the police officers in that life.
No, I'm not subscribing to that. You can have whatever lifestyle you want, but the police, quote unquote, are supposed to be held to a higher standard. They're not judge, jury, and executioner, and that's exactly what they were in this particular case. Though they didn't pull out a gun and shoot him, their conduct in restraining him in order to transport him to jail was the major overwhelming factor in his demise. Watching this video to the video I just did on Bill O'Reilly and Fox News regarding the Freddie Gray decision, and I'm attaching it so that you can see what a more even-handed reporting of the verdict looks like.
Nero was acquitted of second-degree assault, reckless endangerment, and misconduct in office. Now, folks, Edward was one of 6 officers charged in connection to the death of Freddie Gray. He suffered a fatal spinal cord injury while in the back of a police van last year. Now, Nero opted for a trial by judge instead of a jury. Judge Barry Williams, who is black, also a former prosecutor in Baltimore, ruled evidence shows Officer Nero had a limited role in Gray's arrest and loading him into the van. Gray's family attorney commended Judge Williams for not bending to public opinion.
This family wants justice, and justice doesn't have the word guilty attached to it, nor does it have the word not guilty attached to it. Baltimore doesn't want collateral damage because certain elements of the community who didn't hear all of the evidence are upset with the verdict.
Gene Ryan, president of the Baltimore Fraternal Order of Police, released a statement saying, quote, "None of these officers did anything wrong. The state's attorney office responded to the riots and violence in Baltimore by rushing to charge these officers rashly and without any meaningful investigation. They seized a political opportunity and in the process destroyed 6 lives and demolished the relationship between the Baltimore Police Department and their own office." Protesters are calling for convictions in the remaining trials.
Now, I just did a video regarding police unions and the fact that they need to keep their mouths shut more often than having to release all these statements. But that was done in a different video.
The first officer to go on trial ended in a mistrial. That was William Porter. Next month, the trial of Officer Caesar Goodson begins. He's the one who drove the van that day and faces the most serious charge, second-degree murder. All right, folks, here to break it down, the case in terms of our legal panel. We're joined on Skype by Yolita Tuelde, an attorney out of Dallas, A. Scott Bolden, attorney based out of Baltimore, here in D.C. Also, Danielle Blevins, she's an attorney and current U.S. Supreme Court's correspondent. Lawrence Brown, assistant professor of public health at Morgan State University in Baltimore. I want to go to you, Scott. Give me your assessment of how this officer was found not guilty.
Well, a couple of things. Thank you for having me, Roland. With assault, which is a general intent crime, police officers are really tough to convict for assault or even reckless endangerment. One, to have the assault, you've got to have the intent to have an offensive conduct. Here, the defense did a very nice job of indicating that Nero, police officer Nero, had very little to do with the arrest. He has supported the arrest, but that was pretty much it. Secondly, in the court's opinion on reckless endangerment, the basis of a conviction isn't rooted in what happened ultimately, but what was foreseeable, and was the officer's conduct reckless in any way at the time he was engaged in the arrest as part of his official duty. There just wasn't enough facts and evidence there, and essentially what this case of assault and reckless endangerment comes down to police officer Nero is whether it was foreseeable of the death of Freddie Gray, and you simply just did not have that here. Weren't enough facts, and the defense was very shrewd in asking for a bench trial decision by the judge because these are technical and legal defenses rooted in the Maryland statutes, and there just wasn't enough facts that are supported. And I think Judge Williams' decision was right on the point.
Unique?
Yes.
Again, your assessment in terms of how his officer was found not guilty.
Well, the judge, and like the panelist said, I think the judge was correct in his ruling. We have to realize how high the standard for the state is beyond a reasonable doubt. So that means that there can't be any other logical explanation other than the defendant's guilt. And if there is a logical explanation, and logical is subjective for everyone, then you have to find him not guilty. And the judge put a lot of weight on Officer Miller, who's also one of the 6 that's charged and still awaiting trial, put a lot on his testimony, because he's the one that said, I am the one that detained Freddie Gray. I am the one that handcuffed Freddie Gray, and I am the one that walked Freddie Gray to the van, and that is when the defendant met them there. So his contact with him was very limited. So it's not a surprise. This case against Nero was the weakest of the 6. We still have 5 more to go, and so I'm interested to see how the next one, the most serious one against Officer Goodson, is going to go.
Danielle, your assessment.
I think that what we've seen is the prosecutors have had this plan, and it hasn't played out the way that they thought it would play out. And I think that they need to reassess the way they want to approach these cases, making sure that they have the facts lined up and they're telling the story. In this case, I think that probably the judge came out with the right decision, because the facts were, as they were, very limited to point to culpable malfeasance on this officer's part. But I think that if you're going to take the entire country down this process, you better have your T's crossed and your I's dotted.
Lawrence?
Well, I think the issue for me is the way that his defense referred to him as a baby officer who 2 years on the force doesn't know how to buckle a suspect in terms of their seatbelt. So for me, I think people in Baltimore are very concerned that the defense for both trials so far seem to be rooted in, well, we really don't do this, we really don't follow our own policy. And so I think it's disturbing, to say the least, that the facts that have come out in this case, even if the officers are judged not guilty, they're not helping repair the relationship that we have with our police in Baltimore.
Scott, the problem?
All right, let me just say one thing real quick. The main witness for the prosecution, which was Wells, who was the one that raised his hand and said he was the one that was responsible, he basically made a statement that he and the officer Nero were responsible. He got immunity, limited immunity, and then he got up on the stand and basically, I don't know if you want to say lied, but changed the statement that the prosecution was expecting from him, which was, we were responsible for buckling in Mr. Gray. He changed it to, I was responsible for buckling Mr. Gray in, and Officer Nero was not. And that basically just, sank their case. So, I mean, the case could have gone either way, but that particular prosecutor's witness testimony basically, killed that case. And there's really no way that the judge was going to be able to find Officer Nero guilty. All right. Anyway, back to the additional information.
What we're already saying is that you hear even the Fraternal Order Police say tragic death should have happened, but you now had 2 officers, one mistrial, one found not guilty. It is as if Freddie Gray was killed, but nobody can really explain who should be held responsible for Freddie Gray being killed.
Well, Roland, all 6 are responsible. The question is, are they criminally responsible? And remember, there was a civil suit that was never filed, but the city settled with the Gray family, I think, for about $10 or $15 million, maybe more. And so there is accountability. The fact of the matter is there's no criminal accountability because the standard, listen, all of this gets down to intent, in my opinion. And if you can't prove that the officers had intent or that there was even a legitimate policy to strap him in or to seatbelt him in as part of an arrest, and the defense has done a very good job of highlighting the dysfunctionality of the police force, as well as these orders that come down, and whether you have to follow them or not. I mean, remember, the experts have testified that you should buckle them in, and then the defense experts have said that not necessarily, or that these officers probably didn't even get that order. And so I think one thing this case exposes is the dysfunctionality of the Baltimore Police Department. But there has been responsibility. There's been civil responsibility and millions of dollars paid, and then obviously the exposure to the dysfunctionality of the police department is also a helpful thought or decision that the public is looking at closely.
Dean, what this says to me is also, people have to understand we're dealing with a police culture. It's not a question of the mayor being black, the judge being black, the DA being black, there being black officers. We're dealing with a police culture in this country where, if we're honest, we give cops considerable leeway in these type of cases, and the bar to cross for conviction is so much higher for cops than it is for any regular person.
You're absolutely right. And like you said, when we have situations that involve cops, we rarely ever see them get charged and tried in a court of law. And here we have 6 officers who have been charged, and it needs to be played out in court. And I just want to urge people to just be patient because, yes, we have a not guilty, but it was on a case that was probably the weakest. And so I don't think that has any indication as to how the others are going to play out. We have to understand that now with this verdict, the defense attorneys and the state are going to have to reevaluate their strategies going forward with the other 5 that they're going to have to try. And so here we just need to understand we can't convict people off emotion. We have to convict people based off facts and evidence.
Lars and Danielle, I mean, this is the thing that, again, yes, folks are outraged, folks are upset, but the reality is to even get to a trial is rare when it comes to police officers. And we are still dealing with, again, a very high standard where the public says, look, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to a police officer in nearly every instance.
Well, I mean, I think that's problematic, especially in Baltimore. Our state attorney office got our hopes up, and really announced with force and strength that she heard our cry for justice. She heard the cry of the protesters. And so just like the case in Florida with Trayvon Martin, you wonder if the prosecutor's office that works so closely with the police is actually going to bring the sort of strategy that is needed to convict the police that they work with every day. And I think that's a concern that we have. On one hand, it's really not about just whether or not the officers are guilty. It's about the criminal justice system. Does it work for people living in disinvested red line black communities? And I think that's a real question today.
I think we need to look at our systems and structures to see how they interact, how we interact with them as people of color. And I think that when we, maybe they should bring in a special prosecutor because they may have this type of conflict of interest, and it would make a better working relationship going forward in other cases.
All right, hold tight 1 second. First of all, Lawrence, thank you so very much. Scott Boldy, Udita, I would appreciate you joining us as well. Thanks a lot.
All right, so anyway, I added this as an example of how two different people or networks have two different agendas. And in one case, as at Fox News, the agenda is to attack the victim. And in the second case, which is News One Now, it's basically to present the story and give a point of view basically without attacking either the protagonist or the victim.